Good morning. Going to call the meeting to order at 9:02 a.m. on October 20th. First, we'd like to introduce, we have a new commission member and would like to congratulate her, console her. Ms. Erica Zimak.
Erica Zemak, who's here with us. We're thrilled to have you, Erica. She is the Director of Special Projects at the Center for Human Identification at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in biology from Clarkson University and a master's in forensic science from Pace University. She was the quality director of the Houston Forensic Science Center and has served as a member of the Texas Association of Forensic Quality Managers, as well as the AFQAM. She was a DNA analyst in Nassau County ME's office and the Office of Chief Medical Examiner. She's a member of ASCLD and has served in the OSAC on the Human Forensic Biology Subcommittee. She's also on the implementer task group within OSAC, which we're going to hear more about today from Mark Sola, who's with us. So welcome, Erica. We're thrilled to have you. I did want to give a personal note, which is I went to SWAFs last week to give a talk. And when I put the names of all the commissioners up, because usually I do like the intro of who we are, everybody's appointed by the governor, what everyone's expertise. When I got to Erica's name, there was an audible cult, there was applause among the group.
They did not applaud. I don't think they applaud for you either.
And there was a little yelps of joy from the group. So we're thrilled to have you. Thanks.
All right, let's do the roll call. Please say aye when I call your name. Dr. Patrick Pizzini.
Aye.
Dr. Michael Coble.
Aye.
Mr. Mark Daniel.
Here.
Dr. Nancy Downing.
Here.
Dr. Jasmine Drake.
Here.
Dr. Sarah Kerrigan.
Yeah.
Mr. Jarvis Parsons.
Jarvis, you're muted.
Here, there we go. Sorry.
You're gonna be in a timeout. This is Erica Zemak. Right, everybody that's absent, everyone's here. I assume everyone has had a chance to review all the minutes from the last meeting. If there are any discussion points. Hearing none, is there a motion to adopt the minutes from the July 21st, 2023 meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
We have one abstention because Erica was.
One abstention. All right, next is the office administrative update.
You'll see in your materials that we have the first quarter budget status report. And that includes all of our plans for this next year. Before we get going though, they gave me this lavalier because I do so much talking. Can everybody hear me okay? And I've been instructed that for these mics, unless you need to keep no more than a fist distance between you and the mic in order for it to project for everybody to hear. So just keep that in mind. And I think yours is off, Erica, because the green, yeah. If it's lit with green, it's on. So before we get rolling.
I'm turning it off just because I'm trying to be sensitive.
Okay, great. So we have in your materials the budget status report. Does anyone have any questions about what's in your materials for that? Okay. I think we will continue like we always do to update the budget as we go and as we as we receive income from licensing and expend income on various projects. I do think we need a motion to approve the budget.
All right, so is there a motion to approve the fiscal year 2024 budget projection? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries.
The next thing we wanted to tell you about is that we've been going to a lot of conferences lately. Lots of travel toward the tail end of the summer and early fall. Robert went to SAFE, which is the Southern Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners last week. I went to the SWAPS meeting, presented on a panel to AFCLAM on forensic science commissions generally. And then we also have upcoming various conferences that we'll talk about soon on the agenda. I'm sure I'm forgetting one. But I think we really are trying to get out and go to as many trainings that we're invited to as we can. The challenge with that is that being out of the office a lot means we have such a small staff that sometimes we say yes to all of them, but I think we really are in a situation where we're feeling the full effect of the virtual meetings no longer being an option. It's all almost all of them want you to be there in person. So we went to the IAI meeting in DC. And I really feel like as we move forward, we're going to keep trying to go to as many of these meetings as we can that we get invited to. But just to let you know, it's full steam ahead in person meetings everywhere. I don't have anything else on that. We have continued to launch various phases of the database. The OSAC implementation piece of it is up and rolling. HCIFS, HFSC, and the Austin lab all have uploaded their standards. I know other labs are in the process of doing that. DPS is ready to go, but we're trying to create a function for them where, for example, let's say they implement ASTM 2329, which is its common C-stroke standard. That's going to be applicable across essentially every regional lab that they have. And instead of them having to go in and make that status for everyone, we're trying to make it so that they can select all or select some portion of them, because like for the DNA ones, not all the labs have DNA, so trying to make it more user friendly for them. That's required some additional programming, coding, and so very soon we think DPS will have its information up. And then I think the other labs slowly but surely will also post. So that's everything we have on. Did you have anything else, Lee?
I think that covers everything.
That's everything.
All right, the next section, item number 4, are self-disclosures and complaints. Mr. Daniel.
Yes, sir, Dr. Bernard, we had today 16 disclosures, 1 complaint. Our subcommittee of disclosure complaints did not meet yesterday, as most of these were fairly simple, straightforward. It wasn't really necessary. But our first matter is a holdover from earlier is item 2307. It's disclosure before the police department crime laboratory efficiency testing regarding quantification of delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol material. The ANAP and shared the commission's concerns regarding the lab's quantitation method and validation. Lab actually got the moving quantitative measurement mechanicals from its scope of accreditation. Better, thank you, sir. Good. Yeah, good. And based on the corrective action taken, it's probably best just take no further action. They remove the method from the laboratory scope of work. They notify all the stakeholders. They retrain their chemists on proper validation. Comments or discussions, I'm prepared to make that motion to take no action.
All right, the motion has been made to take no further action. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Excuse me, can Mr. Daniels speak closer to the mic?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries.
Friends, second matter is item 23.18, City of Austin Forensic Science Department, firearm tool mark section. They had a PowerPoint presentation regarding trajectory conclusions. Been provided to the detectives to hold over our previous meeting. The conclusions really weren't technically or administratively reviewed before they were shared with the detectives as required by the staffs of the labs to determine procedure. The analyst had actually reached conclusion regarding the findings. Ultimately, the analyst ended up resigning work. Management determined the analyst did not undertake this action intentionally or failed to follow the policy. It's actually a communication issue of some kind. There was later an accusation by the analyst of some training records falsification that was actually investigated fairly thoroughly and found to be unfounded. They did correct with regard to communication in the lab that be done, not be done by text message. As far as corrective actions, the lab is planning a series of corrective actions response to this disclosure as far as identifying other PowerPoint presentations, reviewing the same, determining accurate information disseminated. They're also updating their firearms training to address specific expectations of interacting with customers. Another courtroom presentation. We're still waiting further information on that, and the recommendation is at this point in time, staff table this matter, pending that additional information. For any comments, questions, or concerns, I'm prepared to make that form of motion. I will do so this time.
All right, motion has been made to table this until we get further information. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, are they? Sorry, all those that are in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried.
With register, our third item is 23.21, come to DPS Lubbock, firearms tool mark section. They had an analyst on staff that had some issues with visual acuity as far as being able to determine the type of metal based on color due to physical limitations he had in that area. Sometimes he documented a composition worksheet sent to me in copper because it was more commonly seen in casework rather than brass. The bunch of caution analysts did not perform casework while the lab was about to determine the root cause of this. They figured out that the visual acuity is not something they look at in the hiring process. They did notify all their stakeholders as far as this issue. They even undertook a full G investigation. There's belief that determination of metal composition by observation alone is not a significant issue in the field. Maybe should not even be part of the worksheets in the case record. Nonetheless, they have corrected the practice of not tracking changes January 2023 and all corrections made after submitting verification. They've evaluated his firearms procedures, determined the composition should remain a required field, consider additional scientific testing if necessary. They also evaluated their training program, determined that more targeted training is necessary for determination of composition. Looks like their corrective action is fairly extensive. In light of that, staff had brought forward recommendations. I'm prepared to make it this time and take no further action given the disclosure of their OIG report, their internal investigation on their case review.
Before we do that, Dr. Busini had helped us evaluate this and had asked some follow-up questions with respect to other forms of analysis that may require one to perceive color. And I think, Dr. Brusine, I don't know if you want to share your perspective on the information they gave back, but I think they do recognize. So when this issue emerged, they called together the entire firearms advisory board, which is, so at DPS, they have these scientific advisory boards. It's essentially made up, the way I understand it. If anybody in the audience, if I'm wrong, please let me know. But for each discipline, they have like a leadership board that helps vet issues, resolve the issues, set sort of policy direction in a sense for across the whole system. And they brought all the firearms group together and talked to them about their perceptions about the significance or lack thereof of what happened in this case and the extent to which people perceive that color impacts one's ability to perform the necessary assays involved. And so I think Dr. Busini had raised questions about a couple of items, and if I'm recalling correctly, I think you were satisfied with the response. They do understand that there are certain additional things that require one to evaluate color. So I don't know if you wanted to share.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was a kind of an issue that was unusual to me, and I think the reply and the response from the laboratory was very satisfying. I think that it makes sense that when you determine the composition just by visual assessment, we have a problem of scale of detection in the sense that you can say that it's copper, it's this, it's that, but at the end of the day, without really, we know that the composition can have more elements than just what we generally perceive. So that's the scale of detection. Now, then there is a question of fitness for purpose. Do we really care when at the end you have to say that a particular bullet was fired with a particular firearm? And that was really the core of the response, and it was clearly not impactful, that determination of the color. But in the services of the laboratories, you also have other type of analysis that they require color assessment, gunshot residue, distance, I like to say estimation rather than determination like you read it, but basically that requires assessment of color, and they recognize that that might be a problem. Otherwise, I brought up also other instances that they were in their services, such as determining the type of firearms based on the ammunition, and certain ammunition and also artisanal one. They have some coloring, some paint that is placed on that is colored. Since it's artisanal, maybe from when it's come from industry, the lab is right to tell me that they're pretty much all the same color, so it's not really very important per se as the color for that kind of information. So yes, based on that, to make it short, I think that I brought up some other instances where color vision may be important, and they responded well and adequately based on the scope of services that they provide. Maybe a final consideration, I think that color assessment, it's very important in general for forensic science examination. Just like in fingerprints, they do visual acuity. I would strongly recommend to have that ability under control. Otherwise, you might risk, which was not the case of typically here for firearms, but that you might like to have an instrument that it's off calibration, that you can have a systematic error in the process. To make an analogy with instrumentation. So I think that it's important, and the way they have responded is that they will try to prevent a situation like that in the future. So then to summarize and satisfy their response.
And we said in the response that color vision acuity is currently required for seized drugs trace, forensic document examination, audio video enhancements, and will be added to firearms and tool marks. Based on the feedback of their working group, they're reevaluating job descriptions for DNA DME, friction ridge, and APHIS. These disciplines may be the first to look at a piece of evidence and as such are required to perform general screening duties where color acuity may be important. So they're reconsidering all of it and I really think, I mean, I've been in touch with Brady throughout this process, but I think they really sort of dug in and came together as a group to run this into the ground in terms of what, if anything, they needed to do. So though it was an unusual situation, I think it helped DPS in that they were able to take a step back because of it and evaluate some core questions about the testing they do and how it's done and whether it's uniform throughout and so forth. So I think it was a good exercise for DPS.
Well, if there are no further comments or questions, I will this time make a motion to take no further action in investigation. You watch you.
All right, motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Brings to our fourth matter, it's item 23.42. It comes out of Bear County Criminal Investigation Laboratory Seized Drug Section, where 5 Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol quantitation cases were reported, where the parameters of the positive control in the range set for 1 point quantitation procedure, but were out of range for the calibration curve procedure. The lab reviewed the matter. They believe the analysts did not have proper full understanding of SOPs, the procedure that new and been implemented, I think, back in February. The error of the POTS control compared to the calibration curve was not immediately visible on the spreadsheet that the lab used for calculations. Supervisor undertook to review all the cases. Their corrective actions, including the added percentage error calculation of POTS control. They now review all the Delta-9 THC quantitative standard operating procedures at the beginning of each month. They did notify their prosecutor's office. They also have changed leadership coming up sometime toward the end of the year. And with that having been addressed and corrected, staff reviewed the matter carefully, made a recommendation, take no further action. Item analysis, corrective action made by the lab. Are any questions, comments, or concerns? I'll make that motion this time.
Is there a second?
Second,
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Brings to our fifth item, 23.45, comes also out of the Bear County Criminal Investigation Lab, received drug section. Pretty simple matter. The lab received a subpoena for records. Personnel misunderstood as to how that's to be applied. They did not provide the record pursuant to the subpoena. They had somehow been under the impression from the former lab director that they weren't supposed to share documents with the defense counsel. Appear they did not have a complete understanding of discovery or Michael Morton Act. And that's since been corrected, I'm sorry. Appear to be a misunderstanding of the lab's policy and misinterpretation of law. They now inform us that beginning of each month that what the policy is, apply the standards, which is a good thing. That being stated, our staff had reviewed the matter, made a recommendation to us to take no further action, give correction, corrective actions made, and also the potential for some new leadership in the lab towards the end of the year. If there are not any comments, questions, or concerns, I'll make that form motion this time.
No discussion. All right, motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And then our fifth item also comes out of Bear County, item 3.47. Back in July, the lab discovered using a microbalance with a 5 milligram weight for quality check, acceptable range is 5.001 to 5.005 grams. The vendor had provided that as a standard over the course of 10 months. The house reported the weight log of 9 times properly. His analysis, the lab previously had a 500-gram weight, out range of 4.95 to 5.50. So it was thought that the staff was still relying on prior standard. They acknowledged the failure to communicate the change in weight. They looked at 27 affected cases, identified a case with reported percentage of THC closest to their established threshold. Corrective action being the lab developed a general weighing guideline included in the sections, procedures, and training manuals. They also placed a memorandum in each case file with the standard. Again, staff had reviewed this thoroughly, made a recommendation to take further action, given the corrective action. Root cause analysis review. They also anticipated change leadership towards the year. That being said, if there are any comments or questions or concerns, I think that motion to take no further action.
Hearing no comments, is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our 7th matter. It comes out of Harris County Institute of Forensic Science, item 23.5. Fairly simple. They discovered an incident of contamination, usually Sharpie used to mark clothing items of evidence. A DNA profile detected on one clothing item. It was submitted evidence from another case determined to be consistent with the same profile. Based on the facts of the case, it seemed unlikely to have the same profile and contributors. So investigated the case, determined the same Sharpie had been used to mark evidence. The lab software review found no other cases were affected by the Sharpie contamination. By the way, that's the word about it. There's any Sharpie contamination. Got it?
Never heard that
Yeah,
before.
it's new stuff, yeah. And they took several corrective actions to prevent the recurrence of similar events. They now discard the Sharpies, or they claim that they didn't find other cases. In light of their actions, the staff had reviewed this, made a recommendation, take no further action, which I concur with, and make a formal motion for any questions, comments, or concerns.
Can we pause on this one a little bit, because it's, I'm very grateful to the laboratory for coming to us with it as quickly and thoroughly as they did. They really did good, solid work on root cause analysis. And when I read it, I had to pause for a little while, because my immediate thought was, is it possible that other laboratories could inadvertently, using a Sharpie, which Robert was in my office when we were reading it, he said, I prosecuted for 30 years and the Sharpies are all, I mean, you see the Sharpies as part of how labs collect evidence and how the forensic biology screening process happens. Sharpies are commonly used to circle stains or suspected stains, perceived stains, and you know, it's not like the biology screener was trying to run the Sharpie through the stain. It would have been entirely inadvertent. And I just would love to hear from our DNA experts whether or not we should really make sure that the community knows about the disclosure and talk about this a little bit more, because I have to imagine that it just feels like something that could happen. Just to be super clear, I mean, what happened in this case, and HCIFS can tell me if I'm wrong, but a biology screener was using a Sharpie to circle a perceived or a suspected stain that one would send along for DNA testing, and because the Sharpie ran into some portion of the stain, the DNA from that evidence ended up being detected in other cases subsequent and removed in time from the case that that person was working when they first used the Sharpie.
And I don't remember the discussion, there were also two other representations of there was one that I've seen it where the bound a stain, whether it's jeans or shirts. This made a recitation, they make their best attempt not to draw through the stain. I've never seen that. I guess maybe y'all can clarify the number two. The suggestion they clean a Sharpie. How do you clean a Sharpie? I don't understand the Sharpie cleaners.
Well, I mean, I mean, y'all can speak to that, but I just have to wonder. I mean, I understand like that, I'm sure that they're trained not to color, not to go through the stain, but how do you know with the sensitivity of the technology?
Wouldn't you pick it up in another case though?
Well, that's what they did.
No, but I
Maybe
mean, if
they
it was a repetitive issue,
Mhm.
if you're running SDRs on it, you should have picked it up in two different cases.
Well, I think maybe we'll enlighten us, hopefully. Thank you. We can pull the mic off the stand. Sorry, it's super tall, this podium, right? It's like, it's for giants. Hold on, I don't want to whack you in the face.
Is it on? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a few more details because I mean, I had pause about this too, right? I mean, we were very certain that this affected the one case because, and there a lot went into finding the root cause. This was not an obvious root cause. We didn't really want to believe that that was the root cause because everybody in serology marks clothing with Sharpies for when you're looking for stains. There is something though, first, I just want everyone to understand that was unique. The original case, the clothing that the Sharpie was used on had a very heavily saturated stain. It was a semen stain that was a neat stain, meaning there was a lot of sperm, a lot of DNA. That lends to, and because the Sharpie, and remember, semen is invisible to the eye. Don't want to get into too many details as a DNA analyst, we talk about these things, but you use alternate light source to detect it, or you use a reagent, acid phosphatase to do the presumptive test. So through the testing, you see the area, but when you're circling, when you're going back and circling, yeah, it's not going to be exact. You are trying to trace around the stain, but it is a human thing to understand that she might have gone through the stain. And she had also circled another stain because she thought there was some possible blood in there. So rarely you will circle within another stain. But the second case that happened weeks later, the semen thing was very weak, not a lot of DNA. So you can see that when the Sharpie went through the very saturated stain, that's where the carryover was, we believe, and was able to be detected on the other. So it was just kind of a perfect storm because had it been the other way around, the DNA wouldn't have even been detected of that first, if that makes sense. And yeah, we thought about this. Could this have happened? You know, we looked through all of the profiles to determine if there was any even similar alleles that were foreign to other cases, and we just didn't. And we really think that was isolated. How you clean a Sharpie, it sounds weird, but you manually rub it with bleach. And they tested if whether that works. And it does, it just makes the life of the Sharpie less because you're, removing stuff. So I prefer them just throw it away. I have no problem spending a lot of money on Sharpies, but they want to sometimes try to clean it. But Is it a possibility that there's low-level alleles carried over with these instruments? It's always a possibility, and I think the labs do need to be aware of that, and that's why we are throwing them out or cleaning them out. But I'm also happy to answer other questions. This was a really weird instance, and I wanted to disclose it, not because the outcome was severe. The case hadn't been reported yet, so nobody was implicated. Our catching of the contamination prevented a sample from a DNA profile from being uploaded into CODIS that shouldn't have, because we have a database to catch these things. So I was really pleased with how it turned out, but yeah, it did give me pause.
Sorry, I wanted to say that I think it would be helpful from my perspective to maybe walk through some of the data to have better understanding. There is that expertise, if you will. So, and also I know that you mentioned swipe tests and generating data to demonstrate. I think it would be very helpful for me personally to also, have a better understanding of how those were conducted and what the results were as well. And I think that there's information here that is specific to laboratories throughout Texas, possibly further, right? And it's not just if it's as it's described, it's not just a laboratory, the Harris County Institute issue. This is something that I think we need to talk about at a broader level.
I completely agree, and I don't know if it's possible to recommend that maybe we table this specific item for now, maybe have some time for looking at some additional data information.
Speaking of, if I can make a comment on that, I got curious about this topic and just went online and I found that Duquesne University, their forensic science program, I think it's a student project titled DNA contamination from Endel Sharpie markers used to wash blind bodily fluids in a forensic laboratory. I haven't read it, it's a poster, but that tells me that either they have experienced the issue or they saw it to be a possible issue. So I think that I agree with your suggestion that maybe we could take a look into that and maybe come up with some recommendation, but we all know that the tendency is to increase the sensitivity on the instrumentation, and the higher the sensitivity, the higher the risk of contamination or pollution. Even here, just looking at the conclusion, they say although few samples had measurable DNA concentrations and they were low in quantity, the chance of contamination is still present. So maybe you can make a distinction when you have a nice clear stain that you can tell apart what is a contamination and not. But when you start having mixtures, I would say, and the expert can, I don't know if they confirm, so good luck with that.
Exactly. That's the, you may have where the profile from the Sharpies now put into a 2-person mixture. Now it looks like a 3-person mixture. You may get to a point where it comes now inconclusive. We can't move forward because of that. So it'd be interesting to see.
We can sort of table this, bring back discussion. I'm sitting here with my lawyer brain working, which is always dangerous. And my thought is, you have an item of evidence, let's say a pair of cats, jeans. You have multiple stains on there. And should a separate Sharpie be used for every stain as a best practice? Same Sharpie for that one item of clothing at a time. That might be worthy of discussion. Maybe we can formulate some not best, but better practices. Mercedes promised to read this article. Tell us what that's.
Dr. Bussini, the poster that you're looking at, where is that?
Oh, I just went online and found it. I can download it and send.
Yeah, we could also see what research is out there on this subject, because maybe people have done studies.
We thought about publishing ourselves this,
You should,
or if it would be of interest. I mean,
it's of interest, definitely of interest, and yeah, we can think about.
Recording in progress.
Sure, I think, it's really worth I think we should present this to the other labs. only the lab.
If I can ask,
Can you mute, please? Because we're getting reverberations from your, mic.
Should be okay now.
All right.
hello. You asked, so for data, what besides the swipe test, what part of the data did you want to see? And can we make a distinction between, is our corrective action sufficient, separate than the conversation for the implications for the community?
I'm not sure, I don't want to speak for y'all, but the sense that I'm getting is you'd like to see the data to assess whether the corrective action is sufficient, and then separately, we need to have a broader conversation, is that right?
I'll just mention that I can't really say a whole lot, but at a recent SWIG-DAM meeting, there was a discussion about a cold case investigation from a molestation that happened in the 1970s. But apparently what happened is during the examination of the evidence looking at it through the microscope to look for stains on blue jeans or underwear, there was transfer of DNA from that young boy to another case of the sexual assault of a woman, but he was 11 years old at the time, so he could not have committed that. They figured that it was this transfer from this lens of the microscope touching the evidence and then touching another item of evidence later. So it's not just Sharpies, there are other things maybe we need to be thinking about too.
We can do one or two things. We can either table this particular, or we can follow with recommendation and then take the topic for a further workup. So either one would be fine by me. Is there somebody have a recommendation?
I don't see the value of tabling this. I see the value of pursuing it, that from the lab's perspective, I think we can conclude it. The RCA was really robust. So I'm comfortable with us not tabling this disclosure.
The question I would have is if the commission doesn't table it, are you okay with sharing the data so that, because we can always bring something back up again. If you all get the data from the Institute and you say, oh, wait, there's a bunch of stuff in here, we can add it back to the agenda. We have a provision in the rules that allows us to do that if there's material additional information. So that's one way to handle it.
I absolutely would share whatever data info, because again, we do think the conversation needs to happen, but yeah, just for the root cause, you sound that we isolated to the serology bench, that we had the log to show, and that was the only common area for processing where it could have happened. So we ruled out things like other areas of touching. So yeah, that's the only thing I would add. But yeah, absolutely, we will share whatever you would like to see.
And I would like to point out that Mickey's work in the area of root cause analysis is like legendary. When we get one from Mickey, it's always like, who's gonna be, we always review them anyway, you know, because confirmation bias and all that, but they always do a good job, right?
Would this be something that, and proposed topics for the next agenda for the meeting, is this time, would the time work out for that?
We will make it work.
Okay.
We will- Mr. Daniel will have to speak even faster. No, I'm kidding. We can work it onto the agenda for
Let's
sure.
do that when we get down to 13. With that, discuss it next meeting, but with that being said, I will this time make a motion to take no further action. Certainly, share that.
All right, is there a second?
Second,
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings to our 8th item, it's item 23.57, that's down also the Bear County Investigation Laboratory seized drugs. A laboratory discovered analysts were actually disposing of provisional observation notes after transcription. some of the seized drug analysts recorded drug weight notes on paper and then putting them in the LIMS system. Later, instead of recording weight directions worksheet, as they exposed paper record. The lab transition to the system, sometime before that, water worksheet setup. It closed the evidence window and weights, they considered that process of times. Lab is give analysts two options. First, they can record the weights directly on the worksheet at the time they make their observations, or they can note weights separately and are layered, but they must scan the notebook page into their system. It appears that would be sufficient to correct this issue. It was reviewed thoroughly. It was corrective action taken in light of that. Staff have made a recommendation, take no further action, which I concur with, to make that motion. Comments or motion?
Hearing none, is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our ninth item. It's item 23.59, comes from Intermountain Forensics biology section. They had an analyst identified several mistakes or work. They temporarily removed the analyst from casework back in July. Ultimately, terminated employment. Several issues. Case arose, including sampling reagent blanks actually switched to other. We also observed documentation in a case that consistent case record. Lab made a decision not to undertake any additional retraining. Felt like a way of cause or insufficient management oversight, lack of detailed procedures, and confidence issues with that analyst. By way of corrective action, they evaluated all the casework, they had notification, effectively the sample switch. They also observed any other indications of sample switching. All results were actually consistent. And immediately moved this person from performing additional processing steps, except sample collecting. They updated their case chronicle, case record. Lab figured out the only worksheet done in Texas case was one the AC collection of 4 items. In light of their corrective action, staff made a recommendation to take no further action. And there's no longer working for Intermountain, working on Texas cases. Did not include any analysis or recommendations. Any comments, questions, concern on or make that motion, take no further action.
Hearing no discussion, is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. The next, Dr. Koval, Ms. Zemak should recuse themselves.
This item comes from UNT Health Science Center, Center for Identification. I have discovered a discrepancy involved with recording of information used to calculate the solution of actual mix used in extraction solution. Labs mail DNA screening process. There was variation understanding by their technical people recording and pertinent information. Late in August, the supervisor technical review, page 22.1403, they identified an error in recorded information. Case PowerPoint worksheet. Number of actual samples and standard recorded table rows of the PowerPoint worksheet did not match the total number of recorded worksheets. Number of reaction box. Number reflected box 52 didn't reflect the total number of samples plus the standards 62. Technologists completed the processing worksheet indicated this was a data error and occurred following the completion of the process. However, identifying how it could have occurred and confirming the statements of the related questions arose. As far as analysis, they had interviews with technologists regarding corrective action. Indicated error occurred when the technology inadvertently changed the totals box from PQ worksheet when they intended to change the totals on the MS worksheet. The lab did undertake extensive case review, which was difficult as far as the level of certainty. Timeframe of variations identified by the corrective actions matter 22 began for each technologies. While it's highly unlikely this actually occurred in small batches, abundance of cost and time to identify this issue was overestimated by the lab, which is good. They undertook the review from December 2021 all the way through September of this year. They also notified accrediting bodies, AMAB. They also notified our commission. They provided list cases to the applicable prosecuting agencies. They'll also send that information about corrective actions. Their case review is extensive. Their corrective action is listed in our materials is also being extensive. In light of that, the corrective action root cause analysis, staff made a recommendation to take no further action, which I would concur with. Or make that form motion this time.
Any further discussion? Is there a second?
Second,
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Brings up kind of a new category, this category of description of loss or damage evidence in our disclosure. The first one comes DPS Austin's out of 23.41. And the DPS lab here in Austin, ordinance in the seized drug section, we're missing drug evidence was mailed from NMS labs via an overnight carrier. The manifest showed there were supposed to be 2 paper bags, items 1 and 2. 1 plus 1 equals 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. But when they opened it, item 2 wasn't there. 1 could not move the second bag. I could go on ad nauseam about all the efforts they made to locate that bag. It did not occur. NMS did their investigation too, clearly could not locate the item. DPS couldn't locate the item. They notified the submitting agency. Did analyze first item. As far as corrective actions, this overnight carrier, they're currently documenting tracking issues with using a different provider. I don't know what else could have been done. It's not there. It's not there. Something needs to be addressed, corrected, obviously. So staff has made a recommendation to take no further action. I would respectfully concur with that. Make that form motion this time.
I did want to say, I don't see Brady Mills in the audience, but we talked about this issue, and I think one of the challenges for DPS is obviously based on the fact that we've had to create a whole separate section of our agenda for missing evidence because carriers are losing it, that they wanted to switch carriers. Now, the procurement issues in the state are such that you have to go to the comptroller and explain why you need it. You got to ask for a special dispensation to go with somebody else. And so that has been done. But the process of getting all of it switched over is fairly extensive. So they're working on it. In the meantime, he said you may still see this section of the agenda for a little while.
Well, if there were to identify another carrier that's doesn't necessarily mean the same type of activity might not occur with that carrier too. So
That is
let's see
true.
where
They also have investigated using the, those boxes that lock and are hard, outside and you can't get into them. The challenge with that is that it really impacts costs because they're so heavy. And NMS had made that recommendation last time, so they're trying to do that where they can. But it is not an insignificant impact on budget. So I don't know if DPS wants to say anything else. I feel like every meeting we address this, so.
So I will make a motion to take no further action.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Brings us to our 12,023.46. Comes out of DPS Tyler seized drugs. Same story, second verse. Lab discovered back in June, 8 by 10 envelope containing several layers of plastic. Guess what? 3.62 grams of meth was missing. I've been bar coded. Analysts perform analysis on custody. Located. And search and inventory of various possible storage locations, but not located yet. And because it's correct, like it's not located and notified us engaged. Not sure what else can be done, but staff is recommending no further action, which I concur with all stakeholders notified. I will make that point. Motion this time to take no further action.
Is there a second?
Second,
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Brings to our 13th item, 23.50 comes from DPS Garland, blood alcohol case. This is not the same issue, but DPS Garland received the blood alcohol evidence. They shipped to Houston. Live damage. Lab discovered blood alcohol tubes containing some plastic intermediate container could be broken. There's been full of blood, only a small amount remaining. Crushed somehow. The lab could not determine the extent of damage when the kit initially arrived at the lab after receiving evidence. Technicians did no verification. The blood tubes were intact prior to mailing. They believe they were actually likely damaged. Shipped to Garland. Garland did notify the customer about the situation. Corrective action. I have updated his case record to reflect exactly what happened. All the incident reports. August lab sent notification to all its customers. Reporting issues are experiencing shipping. I'm not sure what else can be done. Happened, items broken, so staff made a recommendation to us to take no further action. Further than that, make that form of motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And that takes us to our 14th item, which is DPS Lubbock seized drugs. Been a overnight carrier shipment from DPS Lubbock lab to DPS Austin. The item arrived with visible damage in Austin. Medium brown bag. It had a missing container. Brown bag contained 6 grams of cocaine, which is a great shock. And they realized that the package had been shipped to from Lubbock, went to the overnight carriers hub up in Memphis, Tennessee. Left there and went to Austin. Lubbock lab manager contacted Texas Rangers to evaluate what they could do. Lubbock technician confirmed the evidence out of the Lubbock lab. All stakeholders are notified. Lab sent notification to all customers, making them aware of the issue. DPS is exploring process, implementing new practice with rigid shipping containers. A lot of it's that might help. I'm certain about that. But what else can be done? I don't know. So as far as recommendation of staff, take no further action given the analysis, corrective action, plan to utilize a new rigid locked shipping container. Not any questions or concerns, I'll make that form of motion, take no further action.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Which brings us to our 15th item, it comes out of DPS Garland, also a blood alcohol case, late August, DPS Garland. Were an incident or two missing blood alcohol kits, they had been shipped by Federal Express, Garland Lab, back to the customer after. I'm sure was notified by the DA's office, stating evidence could not be located. Lab completed original blood alcohol analysis request for the DPS office for toxicology 2 years earlier. Lab manager contacted all the representatives of police departments, law enforcement agency. As far as root cause, the evidence technician failed to update the agency regarding the laboratory information management system. They informed of the new contact information by this or these police department technician also did not notify management. So the Garland manager spoke to the submitting agency and the DA's office in early September. Neither case had been ordered to adjudicate before this at that time. Corrective action. I have to evaluate other preventive measures related to shipping evidence. Discuss previous disclosure, evaluating better way, system-wide improvement for these issues. What we do here at this commission, I don't know. Well, improve procedures. Address this problem. So staff made a recommendation, take no further action. I concur with that, in the root cause analysis, corrective action. We'll make that form of motion, unless anybody had comments or questions or concerns.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. I think the answer on this is if they change vendors, see if the results change. in this, 'cause this is pretty repetitive with the same vendor.
Carl, we've always had maybe 1, 2 cases. Last 24, 30 months, it's accelerated. There's brings us to item 16, it's DPS youth material trace, fairly simple matter. They report an incident out of the trade material trace section, analysts logged a very small paint chip, a 1 millimeter paint chip, attempting to cross section paint chip analysis. Analysts said it had bounced off his tweezers out of the work area. What area conceived the place could be is not located. Sounds like largely due to the size. Supervisor notified. Laboratory appreciates increased risk and loss for small fragile items of evidence. Corrective action is they should report to the customer. Saying it occurred. Lost it, fell the sword, admitted they lost the item. They did perform additional work on other items. What happens, so staff, well, for, I think it's appropriate recommendation, take no further action. I concur with that, make that form of motion. Questions or comments at this time?
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Getting close to the end, our 17th item is a complaint. It's addressed to the Science Center, Houston PD Crime Lab. DNA is brought by Troy Tillman. Comes out of conviction way back more than 20 years ago. Sexual assault matter. Complaint is pretty broad and alleged faulty laboratory, alleged contamination without being specific about what was contaminated, where, when, and how. The analyst, complained of is coming in contact with this case. Supposedly wrong his testimony. DNA mixture review team reviewed this matter back in 2017 and actually closed the case at that time without facts supporting the contention. The allegations that everything was contaminated in the lab. Staff and respectively recommended the complaint need to be dismissed. Largely because it was reviewed and closed by the mixture review team in 2017, and also just the broad conclusory allegations of contamination without any actual support of this allegation. I know we've all had a chance to review this. I have, and I concur with the recommendation by staff, make a motion to dismiss at this time. Unless there's further comments or questions.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
I do this every time this for House, Dr. Bernard, but we also had 3 complaints dismissed by staff, which they have authority to do. Rules. It's 23.44, 23.48, 23.49. I think it's appropriate that we give our collective approval for the action taken by staff in those matters. It is one that comes out of Unity Health Science. Item 1. And there be separately.
I would like that.
Let's do it separate. Let's do 23.44 first. I will make a motion that we give our approval to staff dismissal of that complaint, perhaps seeing that Dr. Cole accused himself.
Any discussion? All right, is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Next item, 23.48 is a complaint by Laura Sims concerning autopsy. Staff. Jurisdictional. Make that form of motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Our last item by staff and administratively dismissed 23.49. I voted to approve that in terms of autopsy finding jurisdiction. So I would make that form of motion.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Dr. Martin, I believe that concludes our complaints disclosure matters.
Thank you very much. All right, item number 5 is the discussion of the crime laboratory accreditation program.
For item number 5A, what you have in your meeting materials is a summary of our reported accreditation nonconformities or activities this quarter. And just give a quick summary for Erica, since she's new. I know, Erica, you've worked with us in so many different capacities, so you probably fully understand this. But we get reported nonconformities from accredited laboratories, and then they're just considered by staff and then categorized as either self-disclosures received by labs, reported as licensing issues, which we don't have any this quarter, proficiency testing, non-consensus reports, or accreditation issues. And then sometimes they can be categorized as a pending commission investigation. And here we just have a summary of everything we put lumped in the accreditation category, and we summarize it in the memorandum. We had 11 reported accreditation activities this quarter. 5 of them were successful surveillance assessments and continuations of accreditation by either ANAB and A2LA, which are the 2 accrediting bodies that we recognize now. 5 reassessments and renewals of accreditation by the 2 accrediting bodies that we recognize. 1 laboratory reported an inactive status of accreditation due to staffing issues, and 1 person in training right now. And we had one of those reassessments where we asked Dr. Kerrigan and Dr. Drake to look at some of the toxicology and disease drugs issues that were going on in the lab. I'm not sure if you had any follow-up questions on that one. It was the quality physics toxicology one.
When we were looking at, so they were on the accreditation memo, and for everybody in the audience, we actually gave a little mini spur of the moment presentation to UNT on how we do things at the commission, which I think we had a call about that, but I feel like maybe we should do a regular one, because I think the folks that I was talking to felt like it was helpful. So when you all copy us on accreditation communications, just like Lee says, it can be anything from, you know, we had a surveillance visit, no nonconformities, to a list of 3 pages of nonconformities identified by either ANAP or A2LA. And we see, you know, typically we see sort of a similar rhythm among labs of things that come up. And every once in a while, we see either the type of nonconformity is very fundamental and sort of feels basic to the operations of the laboratory, or there are so many of them, either the quantity or the, I guess you'd call it quality of what is being pointed out by the accrediting body leads Lee and me to feel like we need to ask more questions. And so there were 2 laboratories, Quality Forensic Toxicology and RJ Lee, I think is the name of the other one. RJ Lee, I think we had their stuff on here last time, and we asked Patrick to, Dr. Lucini, to take a look at it, and he checked out what they did, and we got additional information from them. And we think that what they did is address the issues that were identified. They do a lot of materials trace work, which there are only a couple of, I guess you might call them boutique labs, like Microtrace and so forth, that do that. So the space is fairly small. Outside of Texas DPS, which is the major publicly funded materials trace lab that we have in the state, because a lot of state funded or county funded labs don't have extensive materials trace work anymore. They may do GSR, but that's sort of the beginning and the end of it. So I think we're okay on RJ Lee group. Quality Forensic Toxicology has a lot of deficiencies. And so what I would suggest, unless Dr. Kerrigan or Dr. Drake have specific thoughts on it, there are 24 deficiencies. So I really feel like we should go to A2LA, like we do sometimes with ANAB, and talk to them about their perceptions, because they were the ones that were on site and identified all of these. And a lot of times that really helps clarify things. Like if you recall, when Derek Sanders came to us from Brazoria County, one of the first things we did was meet with ANAB and really try to get a handle on what Derek was seeing when he took the lab over, and ask them their thoughts, because they've been doing assessments, you know, I mean, they've been accrediting the labs and charging the labs money to accredit them. So Dr. Kerrigan, those were my thoughts and looking at it. I don't know if you had additional feedback you wanted to offer.
Well, I'm glad you addressed it. I agree. I was going to ask about it at the meeting. I think it's not just the number of deficiencies, but it's the nature of the deficiencies, a little bit of a concern. So I think that it would be good to have some discussion there. I think one of the attachments in our packet, which was, I think, the detailed report from QFT didn't upload for some of us. So there may be some materials that we haven't seen. But I do think it's something that we need to look at, particularly in light of the fact that this is a reassessment. And so when you see that many deficiencies that are this foundational in nature, this is not a new lab that is not familiar with the process or the standards themselves. So I think it's worthy of it.
So we will go ahead and do that and then bring the information back next time. And I think that was it.
That's good, I think the accreditation. Item B here is our proficiency testing memo. And this is where we summarize any non-consensus proficiency testing activities that are reported to us. We had 11 reported non-consensus proficiency testing activities this quarter. In 5 of those, the laboratory did not use the method that was being tested in their own internal casework. In 3 of those, the answer called for on the tests was outside the laboratory's validated reporting limits. And in 1, staff followed up on a corrective action by the lab where the analyst and the technical reviewer in that case missed the identification of a drug while performing the screening on the test, one of the drugs on the test. And in 1 instance, the individual test taker just wasn't authorized yet for the necessary method or the technology being tested on the proficiency test. And then we had an interesting DNA mixture interpretation non-consensus result that Mike Colby helped us make a determination on as well. I'm not sure if you all want to talk more about any of those. Did you want to talk about the DNA one at all?
So when we looked, what we had was a non-consensus PT where the laboratory participant in the PT essentially ran out of time. And in evaluating the data, a particular allele, which is a 12, I forget what locus it was. D7. She or he left the 12 in and submitted the EP results. It came back non-consensus. The explanation that was afforded to that was that the person was a triallele. And so that, when I looked at it, it sort of flagged me because I thought, well, that's unusual. You don't see those very much. And I'm wondering about whether Dr. Coble should take a look. And so, and then the governor appointed Erica. So then we had 2 people to take a look. So they looked at it and met with the lab. And I think my thoughts on that particular one, and I know this is true, and I apologize that I wasn't on this call, but I think it would be good for the laboratory to see the analysis through to what would have been its natural end had the participant in the PT not run out of time. And also maybe take a look at, generally, I'm not sure why she or he ran out of time, but that might be something to look at too. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Mhm.
Pretty much crystallizes it.
I don't know. I don't have anything else on this except maybe to when I think the laboratory agreed that they would go ahead and do that, see it through to what its natural result would have been, but for the not having more time. And then when they come back to us with that, if we have any further follow-up, we'll bring it to the commission. I don't expect we will, but.
All right, next is item number 6. Report on the licenses issued and renewed.
I'll just start by giving a quick update. The licensing advisory committee met yesterday with 5 new licensing advisory committee members. They elected a new chair, Sandy Parent, who's the most senior member and the comparative disciplines coordinator at DPS, and a vice chair, Kelly Wooters, who is the lab director at private laboratory, Armstrong Forensic Lab in Arlington, Texas. Right now, we have 1,245 current licensees, and we're expecting to renew next year in 2024, 705 licensees who will, during that year, transition to expiration dates on the last day of their birth month. And so staff, licensing staff, and the rest of us are going to be working on helping them make that transition over the next 2-year period. So we discussed that transition and how that's going to play out and how we'll get those notices out. The other 2 big things we did will be discussed in C and D on your agenda. We developed a voluntary license for latent petrol processors in 5 different categories of crime scene licensure, which is really exciting. And we discussed development of a latent print and crime scene model training academy, but I think we'll move on to C for Lynn.
I'm gonna stand up to talk about this. One thing I did want to say is that we're very grateful to Sandy Parent for taking on the chair role because they voted Sandy in and she all of a sudden has to do all the motion, you know, all the rigmarole with taking motions and taking seconds and voting and all of that. I think for scientists who aren't used to it, it can be a little jarring at first, and she did a fabulous job. So we're thrilled to have Sandy and Kelly Waters leading up the LAC. I think they'll do a great job. What I wanted to talk to you all about specifically is the crime scene voluntary license program. So if you recall, that is the last one among all the voluntary licenses that we have created. So we started off with question documents, forensic anthropology, digital, Friction Ridge, and now we're moving to crime scene, which is one of the more challenging ones. And I do want to say at the outset that what I anticipate is that this program may change over time. I anticipate that we may get comments during the rulemaking phase, which we'll need to address and adjudicate. But what we have gotten is feedback from the community that a lot of the practitioners have really worked hard to get to the place where they will be eligible for licensure. And they keep asking us, well, when's the crime scene one going to be ready? When's the crime scene one going to be ready? I took the test. I mean, someone came to the meeting yesterday, we were talking about statistics. And this was not a crime scene person, but they said, I took Dr. Busini's class and he didn't say live to tell about it, but I knew that was what was implied. So people are working really hard to get themselves ready. And I think the program, this particular program has been hanging out there for a while. The feedback that we got from a number of stakeholders, including the Texas Rangers, but not only the Texas Rangers early on, was that there are a couple of challenges, practical challenges with, for example, initially you might recall when we were looking at that bloodstain pattern analysis case, the Joe Bryan case, we were talking about requiring accreditation, and we learned very quickly what an uphill climb that would be for a lot of law enforcement agencies. So we decided not to do that and to move toward licensure. And keeping in mind that no one has to get this license, even though the word license feels very obligatory, the way the legislature tasked us with this job is that the only mandatory licenses are attached to accredited disciplines, and crime scene is not among those. So the other issue that was brought to our attention early on is that requiring a 4-year degree in natural sciences or something like that, which has been a very hot debate at the OSAC level, would really shut out some very skilled practitioners in this area. So what we've tried to do with this draft program, and we do anticipate that we may get some changes to it, is we really try to be receptive to the community and create something that is challenging but doable. So just rolling through, we essentially have 3 categories and 2 subcategories for crime scene. So we have crime scene processing technician, and this is going to be someone who goes to the scene and collects evidence and documents it. Very simple, no analysis, certainly no reconstruction. Then we have someone who's a crime scene investigation analyst. That's sort of the mid-tier. And this is the place where I think there's some debate about what is the appropriate level of requirements. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. And what this person does is they do everything that a crime scene processing analyst does, but they also may use certain assays to triage the evidence for further testing. So they may conduct chemical presumptive testing on the evidence for purposes of determining what should go where after that. They may also issue a report, though it wouldn't be a report with the type of opinion that might be provided by a reconstruction analyst. So the next category is sort of the highest tier of practitioner in this area. We're talking about crime scene reconstruction. And that's the definition of that we created a long time ago when we first started working on this in the context of the Joe Bryan case. Subspecialties within crime scene reconstruction we're suggesting can be done for blood stain pattern analysis and shooting scene reconstruction, because those are the areas that people often specialize in. So to give you an idea, the requirements that we are suggesting for this, again, voluntary program track in many ways what we've done for latent prints and other disciplines in this space. So for latent prints, we've also added a latent print processing technician, because what we've been told is that some people that work on latent prints don't do ACE or ACE-V, they don't do analysis, comparison, and evaluation, but they may be engaged in pulling prints off of an item of evidence that's brought into the laboratory. So what we're suggesting for minimum education for our technicians, just like we do in other technician categories, it's a high school diploma or equivalent. The only higher level of education, formal education, that is suggested is for the crime scene reconstruction analyst, where we have an associate's degree or equivalent. For minimum work experience, there's a suggestion that that be included. We haven't done that to date, but I think the practitioners feel pretty strongly that you have to have had some exposure in real life to be able to be successful. There's no minimum work experience for latent print processors or crime scene processing technicians, but there is for crime scene investigation analysts. We have, so that's the mid-tier. For the mid-tier, we're suggesting in the proposed rule 6 months of work experience, but I'm supposed to convey to you, Shelley Rossi from Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. She's currently at the ESR course on fluid dynamics in Detroit and was unable to be here, but she wanted to convey to you that she feels strongly that the 6 months is insufficient and it should be a year. So that's something that we can talk about as we move forward. On crime scene reconstruction analyst, the minimum work experience would be 5 years working in crime scene settings. Now, to our knowledge, most of the people who do crime scene reconstruction are doing that work for a long time before they get to the point where they're going to go on the stand and try to explain how things happened in a crime scene. These are very seasoned experts in this area. So in addition to that, we have specific coursework requirements for crime scene reconstruction without any specialties. They will be required to do the college level statistics, just like all of our other analysts, including digital and latents. But we also have 12 semester credit hours of college level coursework or a course approved by the commission, including fluid dynamics, math, and physics. So this is sort of the exchange for not requiring a formal degree, is that there will be actual scientific coursework that people will have to do if they're going to engage in this. Yesterday at our meeting, we noted that we had just said that it would be college level courses, but there are some really high quality courses out there that the commission could approve in this area that may not be sponsored by a college necessarily. We also have a 40-hour crime scene reconstruction course approved by the commission and 440 additional hours of forensic related courses. So that's 11 weeks of training. or in-house mentorship that is documented. And the 440 hours really just comes from, I think, looking at what people usually do before they get to that level of expertise. And it's a lot. There's a lot of training that goes into it. For crime scene reconstruction with specific recognition and bloodstain pattern, it's essentially everything that I just said for the base level reconstruction analysts, but also 2 40-hour advanced courses taught by different instructors with the syllabus accepted by IBPA or IAI. Also a 40-hour fluid dynamics course, also a 40-hour math and physics course, 24 hours of instruction involving presentation and preparation of demonstrative evidence, and 440 additional hours, just like for the baseline crime scene reconstruction person. Then for those who want to do crime scene reconstruction with recognition and shooting incident reconstruction, we're suggesting everything for the base reconstruction license, but also 2 40-hour shooting incident reconstruction courses taught by different instructors with syllabi accepted from IAI, AFD, or ACER. Also 24 hours of instruction involving presentation and preparation of demonstrative evidence, because these disciplines, BPA and shooting scene reconstruction, often involve demonstratives. And again, those 440 additional hours of either coursework or in-house mentorship programs. So for crime scene investigation analysts, the suggestion, and this is the place where I think the rulemaking it may end up changing what we do. So yesterday, the committee accepted 120 hours of forensic related training courses for recommendation to y'all. Again, I'm supposed to convey to you that Shelley Rossi reached out and said she really feels like it should be 240 minimum hours here, because if you think about it, 120 hours is 3 weeks. 240 hours, if my math is right, is 6 weeks. And if you think about what crime scene, this is not reconstruction, it's the mid-tier. So, but they're still going to the scene, doing the activities involved in processing, and using some reagents or other chemical analytical process to triage the evidence to determine whether it needs to go on for other forms of evaluation by the laboratory. So those are really the 2 points. That mid-tier analyst, whether we should do 240-hour minimum coursework plus the 1 year on the job training, or whether it's adequate to do 6 months of on the job training and 120 hours of coursework, or you could approve a rule with something entirely different from that. Exemptions for specific coursework. So the only people in this rubric of licensure that have to do the stats course are the reconstructionists. And that applies whether you have a specialization in BPA or shooting scene reconstruction or not. And then we have laid out for you, the full exam will be required for people doing crime scene reconstruction, technician exam for those who are analysts or technicians. For proficiency monitoring, we're essentially following the same rubric that we use for latents. We understand there is external PT for crime scene, CTS offers it, but some of our new members from LAC yesterday have given us such valuable information already, including the fact that if you do PT in crime scene, even for an organization like the Houston lab, it's really expensive because you can't, number one, you can't share the materials. Number two, they actually come and set the scene up and evaluate how you work the scene. And that's a costly endeavor. It's not just, you know, a more simple test that you might see in one of the chemistry disciplines. So it can be cost prohibitive for people who do CTS, PT, and crime scene. So we're also offering interagency or interagency proficiency monitoring as an option. Our hope is that TDII will get involved in this and participate in ways that labs or agencies can do periodic proficiency testing that is helpful and it actually advances the quality of the work that's being done in the field. Finally, thank you for your patience as I go through all these. When we decided as a group that we were going to heed the feedback that we were getting from people around accreditation, one of the things which is to not require it for crime scene back when we were originally looking at this. One of the things that we acknowledged was that employing agencies do need to do some of the core things that accreditation offers in AR 3125. There's a chart in your materials that pulls out what those items are. We publish that to our website. That is something that we update every January 15th of each year. And it includes things like, you need to document what you're doing, essential fundamental rules around documentation, technical review, the core elements. So that's all in your materials as well. I don't have anything else on this. I do think that we have a proposed rule in your materials that covers all this. I should say for the intermediate level crime scene analyst, the proposed rule includes a 1-year employment requirement and the higher level of training hours at 240. If it goes out for public comment and we get a groundswell of y'all are crazy, where that makes no sense, none of us will apply for this license if you do that, then we could certainly make a change during that process. We would need to get the feedback first to know how people feel about it. So that's everything on that rulemaking. I would imagine there may be public comment, so you might offer that option, Dr. Bernard.
We add one thing, we did talk about, and I incorporated in the standards chart, standards that have been promulgated by the commission through its reports. So those are incorporated in the chart, and there are 3 of them that come from the Cologne report. If you open the standards chart that are on there, and I think all 3 of them may even apply in this context too. So just to let you all know that they're on.
Yeah, I mean, the feedback that we got actually yesterday during public comment was, you all write these reports and some of the recommendations you make may have applicability, not just for accredited labs, but also for non-accredited forensic practitioners in the state. So those should also apply. I think the concern was not that we create sort of a 2-tiered system for that. So we will include that in the chart as we move forward.
All right. We have access where if we have public comment besides those here. There's
No, the public comment will have to happen for people who are in attendance.
Okay. All right, is there anyone who has a comment in the gallery? All right, Mr. Daniel, do you have comments you want to make?
Yes, or just briefly, I can see that for licensing, crime scene investigation, gathering evidence. That's that sort of thing. I do have concern about just crime scene reconstruction. I've studied those people, I've met those people, I've cross-examined those people. With their prior transcripts, it's very alarming things in those areas. I don't profess to have greater knowledge than all the commission members, but what I've seen is, it's such a controversial area. It's been explored on national newscast. It's people that kind of look at the crime scene and sequence events, chronology, and come tout credentials that don't really exist. I have a real concern with it. This is Forensic Science Commission. It's supposed to license science. For the most part, you follow a scientific method of a tried and true process that reveals the same result, results in the same result each and every time. Crime scene reconstruction simply doesn't. Again, that's my personal experience. Many times it can be witchcraft or palm reading. It's the closest thing I can see to it. So I have a real problem with this commission licensing crime scene reconstruction analyst. It is a subjective field that I don't think meets, in my opinion, scientific principles. So that's my comment.
Going to the opposite side of the table, Mr. Parsons, do you have a comment on this?
I'm sorry, did you say me right here?
Yes.
I could hear Mark a little bit. I think Mark's comment is more global in terms of just the actual, how would I put it? The concept of the crime scene reconstruction being licensed. I think mine was more, and I remember doing this was a couple of years ago, was about the education requirements and classes that need to be taken in order to get these licenses. It seems like what Lynn is doing, what they've decided is to try to incorporate those concerns into the structure, and so that gives me a little bit less concern with the licensure as opposed to having the education requirements that are there. That makes me feel a little bit better about this. I understand where Mark is coming from because sometimes it seems like it's guesswork, but I think with the incorporation of the classes that they may be taking, I think that gives me a little bit more, a little bit less pause in this case.
We've had some reconstruction before, and quite a few years ago now, that was pretty controversial. So adding some requirements certainly should tighten it up a little bit. It will be interesting to hear what kind of responses there are. So that being said, is there a motion to propose amendments to Texas Administrative Code chapters 651.202 and 651.222 regarding adding voluntary licenses for the following categories: latent print processing technician, crime scene technician, crime scene analyst, investigation analyst, crime scene reconstruction analyst, crime scene reconstruction analyst with specific recognition, bloodstain pattern analysis, and crime scene reconstruction analyst with specific recognition and shooting incident reconstruction, subject to suggested non-substantive revisions from the Office of the Governor, Texas Register, and staff. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Would like discussion.
Luke?
Yeah,
Dr. Curry,
I'm sorry.
discussion, yeah.
A moment of discussion after the second before we vote, because it wasn't clear to me if we had made a decision regarding the 6 month or the 1 year provision. And then the 120 hours versus.
This, as
240.
you said earlier, includes 240 hours and 1 year experience.
Okay, all right, so that's part of this current
Yes.
vote. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
The proposed rule is for that 240 in 1 year.
And then to hear what responses come back to see, we can evaluate then and make a formal amendment.
Thanks.
I do want to address Mr. Daniel's point because it's a really valid concern that he's raising. There's no question about it. I think part of the thought process is if you avail yourself of the licensing program, you also are committing to follow certain standards, education requirements, and the code of professional responsibility, which has a number of things in it that are designed to ensure that when people go out into the world and do this type of work, they stay within their lane, so to speak. And so one of the advantages in my mind to proceeding is that the connection between the non-laboratory activities and the expectations around knowing what your limitations are, observing those limitations, not misleading the trier of fact and all of that. This is one way to help with that. I'm not saying it's a perfect solution. And I 100% hear what you're saying, Mr. Daniel. I think it's a really valid point. On balance, we decided to put the program together, and we'll see what happens with it, because we over time can change and modify what the requirements are.
One thing about it is that it does give requirements. And if we don't address this at all, they're open field with the very things that you're concerned about with no requirements. So at least it requires more science to it, more regulation, and then again, the code of ethics that would give an attorney an opportunity to file a complaint if they got out of the lane.
And my guess is there are certain practitioners out there who will avail themselves of this license. I mean, we need to be mindful it's voluntary, nobody has to do it, but there are certain people within the community who really are ready to go. And my guess is that in the courtroom, you know, one can start asking, like, are you licensed? Yes, what does that entail? And maybe that will help other people who are currently doing this work, and judges are letting it in regularly. It will encourage them to also avail themselves of the same credential. So we'll see whether that happens, but it's one thought.
Well, conversely, you could also ask someone, so you chose not to do that, and you had the opportunity to do it. So that can be brought in front of the jury as well. All right, so is there any further discussion? There's been a motion, it's been seconded. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed? No. All right, motion carries. All right. Update from the August 25th Latent Crime Model Scene Training Academy.
Oh, so one of the things that we had a meeting with a number of stakeholders, including a representative from the Texas Rangers. And I don't know if people are aware of this, but during this last session, there was an attempt to get an exceptional item in Texas State's budget to create a crime scene training academy. Right now, a lot of the more high level practitioners in this field go to a national forensic, I think it's called the National Forensic Academy, is that right, in Tennessee, where they have to spend quite a bit of money to get up there, and the University of Tennessee or Tennessee State, one of the big universities up there, hosts it. And the thought was, well, why are we not doing our own academy in Texas? And so Texas State had agreed to take that on with the Rangers. But for those of you who are in universities, you'll appreciate this as we did when we were attached to Sam Houston. But exceptional items in a university's budget, especially a budget as large as Texas State, can very easily sort of get lost in terms of priorities. So they did not get the funding from the legislature to create the academy. So we're sort of talking about ways that we could make that happen. Perhaps pilot it. We'll be meeting with Senator Hinojosa to talk about that soon, because they'll be back into a special session. The idea, I think, with the academy is that, number one, if we were able to get it going, it could include all of this coursework that at the end, if one completes it successfully, would result in being qualified to get the voluntary license in any of these categories. And additionally, through that partnership, we would be able to really teach concepts that are at the intersection between science and the law, like what is the Michael Morton Act and how does it apply to these activities? And what, why do we document things? Why do we do root cause analysis? What information needs to come forward in order for a criminal case to have enough engagement by lawyers that there's not an argument later that the due process rights of the defendant were violated simply because the information didn't get where it needed to go. So all of these things are discussions that we're having. I think it could be something really great to have an in Texas program that we would be able to hopefully influence in terms of the curriculum and so forth. There are people in the state of Texas who really are actively engaged in the OSAC, actively engaged in trying to get the highest level of scientific education they can in this area. So I think we have a really, really good group. So we'll keep you updated on whether we're able to make any headway with that.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind in something like this is what are you gonna do, or what will be done about those people that have been out there, years of experience, that theoretically would want to be grandfathered in, who may be part of the problem, not part of the solution. And I think that's going to be an issue that's going to come up.
Yes, it definitely will be. I think from what we've done so far, I mean, this has been a conversation we've been having since 2019. And I think what we tried to do is to listen to the reasonable concerns that practitioners have, but and incorporate them in the rulemaking. There are always going to be people. I mean, there were when we started the licensing program for the accredited ones. There were examiners out there who said, "I've been doing this for 35 years. I'm not taking your stinking statistics because I retire. Done. Out. Peace out." But you know what? Then they won't avail themselves of the license, and
We went through this in forensic pathology, where they would grandfather experience in, and it used to drive me crazy because they'd show up as an expert against you with no training. And I finally convinced the board that they finally made a rule that had to do a fellowship, which made sense. But it's not insurmountable, but it is problematic. All right, after that long discussion. Item number 7. This is an update on the Nan Williams.
so NIST has not issued the foundational review. We've spent most of the time, as you can tell by the reports, length and complexity. Robert and Lee and I spent most of our time in this last quarter trying to bring the Webster matter to a close. So we will go from latent prints to firearms next. So say a prayer.
All right, next is item number 8, and before we get started, I would just like to commend the amount of work and the writing that was done by the attorneys on this. It's incredibly well written and it's well researched, so just want to say it's an excellent job.
Thank you. I would like to thank Dr. Busini who participated in all of this and was the sounding board for Robert and me. Robert is going to do a PowerPoint that summarizes the 73-page report, I believe it is. It is quite long, but we really felt it was important to address this issue thoroughly. There were many people and entities involved in this. And I think in the end, we're really proud of the work product. And I don't know, Dr. Busini, if you want to lead us off before Robert starts with any comments.
Maybe after it.
Okay.
Yes.
Correct my mistake. All right, this is a complaint that was filed by the Harris County Public Defender's Office. I know y'all have been briefed on the fact before, but briefly, it's a 2001 cold case murder that ended up being tried in 2016. The key evidence in the case was a partial palm mark and suspected blood on a curved hole near the body of the victim, and all that impacted the analysis and the collection of the key evidence. HPD had compared the exemplars of 51 possible suspects, including Mr. Webster, to the crime scene back in the day, and they reached no identification. From 2009 to 2014, Ron Smith and Associates came in to help HPD clear out their backlog, and they worked this case as well. One of the examiners for RSNA compared those same exemplars from 51 suspects to this crime scene mark, which Webster was included in one of those, as one of those 51 suspects. They issued a report reporting no identification concluded. And then in 2013, investigators got a COVID hit to Webster and another person named Lorenzo Jones. Police talked to those two suspects, and they had an explanation for why their DNA might have been present on the at the crime scene on the victim. So after the DNA hit, investigators asked Ron Smith and Associates to again compare this known exemplars of Webster and Jones and one other person to this mark. And a new examiner looked at it, and he observed similarities between Webster's exemplar that they were using this whole time and the crime scene mark. So he asked for another exemplar from Webster, and it was a better exemplar. And when he got that, he reported an identification that got technically reviewed, verified. Was actually there were multiple verifications by examining RSA. So at the trial, the project manager testified on behalf of Ron Smith and Associates, and she testified to the history of all these examinations and to the identification that was made by the examiner. And she also testified to independently compare this palm impression and determined it was an identification. She was asked about her confidence level, and one of the statements that she made was, "I compared thousands of prints, and in my opinion, they came from the same source." So the allegations from the PDO were that the results obtained by Ron Smith and Associates are not reproducible, therefore they're not scientifically reliable. Incorporated information that this crime scene mark had been submitted to HFSC in blind examinations and to an independent person in blind examinations, and those examiners had reached an inconclusive conclusion based on what they saw. So part of the investigation into this, we hired, the commission hired a friction grid expert named Glenn Langenberg, published in the field, very well known. And he reviewed all the information in the file and determined that there were other images that were not provided to that first set of blind examiners. Basically, there are two sets of crime scene images. There's one it's taken by Deborah Benningfield in the field. She used a 35mm camera, different lighting, different focus, and it's on a curved surface. So some things that are in one image may not be in another. She then cut that hole out, took it to Dallas, where, skip one. to the Dallas where, the DEA photographed it as well with a digital camera. So when we forwarded this complaint to Ron Smith and Associates, that's one of the first things they said is, I don't think the images that these blind examiners and the first round of blinds were given were a full set. They didn't capture everything. They maintain that any competent examiner would have reached an identification conclusion. So there must be an issue with these images. So HFSC graciously reproduced all the old HPD file with all those images, high resolution. So that's what I was saying. There were DEA images. They were initially taken at low resolution just because of the industry standard at the time. So the DA's office worked with the HPD, the PDO's office, and they ended up only submitting certain DEA images to the blind examiners. And after Dr. Langberg looked at that, he concluded they would have benefited if they would have these other images available too, because they just show different things. So in the commission report, we go through a brief history of the national reports, PCAS and NAS report, and as well as evolution of standards that came through SWCFAST and now OSAC. We talk about some empirical research and friction bridge examination, the black box study by Nobles, repeatability and reproducibility study by Nobles, and a Palm specific black box study. And it's important to know that the complaint doesn't allege in this report doesn't address whether or not this identification was wrong or right, because we don't know ground truth. We're just presenting the information that was obtained. We know here that impressions on liquid, especially blood, can complicate features, and the features that are observed on this palm mark, which is called L1, they have a high degree of uncertainty to them because it may be a true feature that you're looking at, or it might be an artifact of some kind. So one of the observations is it's critical that the analyst look at the impression and document the features they observe before they look at the known exemplar from the defense. And we had in the technical records, RSA provided to us, there were two marks that had a pre-comparison analysis on it. One was just marked by the very first examiner. He only noted 3 minutia, what they call a target group, so he could quickly screen contributors. The second is a more complete documentation of the pre-comparison analysis. It's unclear from the technical record who did that. RSNA contributed, said it's the examiner who had ultimately made the identification based on just the process and workflow of their organization. But his initials are not on this crime scene mark image. There are no entries or annotations at all by the project manager who ended up testifying, and the trial transcript is the only evidence that she performed an examination or verification. So Dr. Langenberg, we asked him to actually look at these exhibits, and he did it, and he utilized multiple photographs because the clarity and reliability of the ridge detail varied depending on which image that you look at. And he documented all of that for comparing them to any known impression. Sometimes he would go back a second or a third time and look at the same image, and sometimes he marked them differently, different minutia or different levels of confidence. And what he's trying to tell us there is there's just variation when you look at the different images, and the feature selections could and did vary by examiners that look at it. And in his opinion, it's far from certain that any competent observer would have reported an identification. So our observations in the report is a challenging print that requires extensive documentation and quality assurance measurements. We emphasize again the importance of this linear, stepwise, sequential approach to the HB process. Because it's critical in establishing the foundation of the expert opinion. We know that this identification may have benefited from blind verification because of the complexity of the image, the possibility that this coded information might bias the examination, and the highly probative nature of this single question mark. We observed that the process used to guard the examiner against this potential biasing coded information should have been documented. The project manager did testify that she didn't tell him that she couldn't say that he didn't learn from any other place. And then we made some observations about the testimony of the project manager, utilizing terms that didn't match and describing her level of competence based on the experience, which is no longer favored type of testimony. So after meetings between all the parties and extensive discussions of which are the best images, it was determined that we submit all the images, not we, but the public defender's office would submit all the images again and high quality known exemplars from Webster and others for a second round of blind examination. And the report of that blind examination was an identification conclusion by the HFSC blind examiners. However, a little nuance here, an examiner one looked at it, he or she initially reached an inconclusive decision. And then examiner two reached an identification. Then they went through a consultation process, which is contemplated in the rules, needs to be documented, where they would point out different things to each other, and examiner one conducted a reanalysis and concurred that it was an identification. So we issued multiple recommendations, the first being image quality should be the best images you can get your hands on. We have recommendations regarding the analysis phase, compared to the evaluation phase. Reported conclusion, these all pretty much track the OSAC proposed best practice documents. Again, about the consultation process, about prints and blood, and the limits of presumptive testing. More recommendations about testimony, accreditation, and my favorite is the technical record disclosure compliance. This is something most people don't know exists, myself included. And then ongoing efforts by the federal government, including OSAC. Incredible collaboration by all the parties involved here, you've seen it as well. That's all. That's all.
Dr. Hussein.
Oh, yes, maybe as a concluding remark, I can only echo to thank all the parties that we can see is in the slide of the thank you. Particularly Dr. Glenn Langenberg, who has more than 20 years experience in casework, in teaching, in the research, in commitment with the discipline. That to me, those are all the ingredients that make forensic expertise. So to say that we were really very lucky having him to help us understand all the disagreement that we had to try to understand for this complaint. That's pretty much it, and thank you very much. It's been interesting. Maybe one last thing. As a forensic scientist, I've learned not only on the let's say the latent brain discipline, but also from the legal side. If you take, for example, well, you don't have to go now, of course, on page 29 in the report, when they talk about the difficulties the defense attorneys have when they are facing a lack of proper documentation in a case. I think that's, for me, it's quite enlightening as a forensic scientist. And overall, recommendation or not recommendation, I would invite the practitioner in Texas to give feedback, and And hopefully the recommendation in the report are in line with what they are thinking already are on how to move forward. Thank you very much.
One of the things that I think is important is just to let the community out there know, because I know a lot of people have been waiting on this report and they really want to know what it has to say. And when we sent it out for feedback, Texas EPS, which is an accredited Friction Ridge group, HFSC, which has an accredited Friction Ridge group, we have a lot of recommendations in there. This is the first report we've written on this, and a lot of them are from OSAC documents, some of which are proposed documents. And I think there is some hesitation within the community to adopt OSAC proposed, because then if it goes to the ASB and it gets changed, then where does it leave them? And I think, having spoken with the people who chaired the OSAC and the SAC and being on the FSSB myself, I think it's fair to say that if one were to comply with the proposed, what's going to come back from ASB, if anything, would be a less stringent version of what's in the proposed, which it may be a perfectly fair point that people want to wait to implement. So one of the things that we're talking about doing is really working. TDII has an OSAC implementers group, and we want to work together with them to see how we can help agencies that do want to implement but are a little bit overwhelmed and intimidated by it. We want to see how we can help ease that process. And I know that OSAC itself, and one of the reasons Mark Stoll wrote, is here today is to share with us tools for implementation. Dr. Kerrigan, as you all know, has been extremely involved in that, as has Erica CMAC. So we have a lot of great resources in Texas. So to the agencies that are looking at the reports and sort of panicking a little bit, we understand that implementation of those items can't happen immediately, quickly, overnight, any of those things. So we just are hoping to work with the local IAI to help advance this. And the other thing that I wanted to emphasize in there is that for lawyers, if all you get in a case is the report that has a 2-sentence or 3-sentence conclusion about an identification to a defendant, whether it's your client or the person whose case you're prosecuting, there's so much information that is not in that one document. So in the case of the second line examination, as Robert said, what is behind that identification is a number of things. We have 2 examiners who were given them separately. One thought the evaluation was inconclusive. The second one thought it was identification. They did a consultation. It is absolutely fair and appropriate for lawyers to ask questions about that process and the human factors that may be involved in that process. But if, as an attorney, you're not seeking more information than just the report, right now perhaps there will be reporting advancements that flag these sorts of things, which is part of what OSAC is working on. But for right now, as we sit here today, if that's all you look at, you're not getting the whole picture of what's going on in the forensic science service provider at all. So that's just something that I feel like the labs, I mean, I see some heads nodding in the audience, because labs have a ton of information and data, and so often attorneys don't take the time to understand what's going on. And so we just need to make sure that everyone knows to ask for more stuff than just the report. Yes, Rob.
Just a quick thing, I noticed in the face of the report, correct me if I'm wrong, HFSC report, they just have a checkbox that says consultation. If it's checked, and you know there is one, it's on the report. So it's not a big lift to reveal that information.
And then it says consultation because one was done, and then you go underneath that into more documentation to actually look and see what the nature of the consultation is, and HFSC will get on, and hopefully all of our labs will get on the phone with the public defender's office and talk through it step by step by step. And that's why when I watched this all go down, I couldn't have been more proud of the participants, because everyone was trying to get to the right answer and establish sort of mutual understanding about the different roles that everyone has in making the criminal justice system work, so. Sorry, that was a little soapboxy, but it was a long road to get to this report.
I think the report is phenomenal, and I just want to acknowledge everyone who was involved in it. I have one minor suggestion, and it relates to what you just said, Lynn, about attorneys using this as a resource. The proposed BPR that's cited multiple times throughout the report. There are lots of proposed best practice recommendations that come from this particular subcommittee, and many of them have very similar names. And if we could actually include a direct link to that document, I think that would really help, because my concern is that someone who's not familiar with that website might actually reread one word incorrectly in the title and land on the wrong proposed BPR document. So if we can just hyperlink it, that would be great.
That's a great
Yeah,
suggestion.
because there are almost a dozen documents there, and the titles are extremely similar.
Thank you, Dr. Kerrigan, we'll do that.
Any other discussion? Or is there a motion to accept this report?
Yes, Dr. Morale. Comment is outstanding. I want to make a motion to adopt it this time.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, the next is item number 9, current training and education projects.
So we have coming up DNA training for lawyers and judges that we're co-sponsoring with the Court of Criminal Appeals, the Texas Center for the Judiciary, TDCAA and TCDLA. So the whole family is involved in this, and it is a massive undertaking that we've been working really closely with Judge Hervey and others on. The way it is set up is that Senator Hinojosa reserved the Capitol Auditorium for the group, and we have created a crime scene scenario that is sort of the guiding light for the training that's happening. So we're working through everything from what happens at the scene all the way through the writ of habeas corpus on the end, combining teams of faculty, lawyers and scientists. The front end of it is fairly is sort of led by the scientific group, and the back end is a little bit more led by the lawyers, because we're talking about writ practice before the CCA. But the idea is that by creating a crime scene narrative and infusing that throughout the training, it will hold the attention of the non-scientists in the group. So when Dr. Coble gets up and talks about the statistics, we're looking at a mock report that actually has statistics that resemble something they might actually see in one of their cases. And when he's talking about what this means and how statistics have evolved over time from RMP, CPI, now we have likelihood ratios, what likelihood ratios do and don't mean, and so forth, that people's attention will be held. And and I just want to recognize Donna Boswell, who's here, because a few years ago, pre-pandemic, she was instrumental in putting together a DNA program for lawyers and judges in North Texas. And it was an excellent program. It was really good. And still, the lawyers and judges and law enforcement who were there came out and said, oh, it's too much. I didn't understand it. It needs to be even simpler. And so at that time, she and Brady Mills and I will never So there's certain moments you remember, we were brainstorming in the lobby of that conference about how do we do a training that will hold the attention of the non-scientists so that they are able to learn about extraction, quantification and amplification without throwing their hands up and, I don't get this, it's too much science. So we're really proud of the program. There are over 300 people registered, which is a lot. It's a lot. And it will be happening very soon, November 2nd and 3rd at the Capitol. If you haven't gotten a ticket, I would definitely suggest going online and registering. So we're excited. Dr. Coble, anything? No?
It's a very exciting program. A lot of work is being put into this, so very excited to see the final product.
Second here, we are in the middle of the National Forensic Leadership Academy certification training for levels 1 and 2. They have a capstone project coming up in Austin, November 16th and 17th. I feel like made this clear when we told everybody we would pay for the cost of the course, but agencies that send people are responsible for paying for travel for their people. There's no way we could pay for travel and the cost of the course. But we do have a room block that's been set up for people. The capstone is really the place where I think a lot of the learning that they've been doing online comes together. We will be talking about Brady and Michael Martin because we love to talk about it at that capstone. And making sure that we integrate that part of what management needs to know. So I think that is also happening, believe it or not, in this building at the same time as the first meeting of the National Association of State Forensic Boards, which is an effort that was put together, spearheaded in large part by Martin McClendon from Arizona and John Morgan, who I know a lot of you know. What we're doing at that meeting, and I think we have somewhere between 30 and 40 people coming, is those states that already have some form of board or commission are coming together to talk about what their respective entities look like. So we have everything from a very, how shall I say, sort of ad hoc and more casual coordinating type board in Arizona, all the way through to us in New York. And it felt fitting to hold it in Boston the first time because Texas, that's all I'm going to say about that. And so we're excited to have that. And Judge Herbie will be attending that as well, which will be great. I think she will do part of the welcome for that. December 7th and 8th, we are meeting at the Texas Rangers Museum in Waco. We just solidified that. 2, and we're super grateful that they're willing to host us. We are having a meeting of that is an extension of the DNA suitability for interpretation meeting that we first had at UNT at the CHI. And what we're going to be talking about here is testimony. So everybody's favorite subject. And I also want to say again, tremendous gratitude to Jared Kennedy and Don Boswell, who are working very hard on that program. We're going to be talking about things like, all the hypotheticals that lawyers love to throw at DNA analysts during testimony and how to appropriately respond to those. So that's what we'll be talking about. They have gathered transcripts as well as sort of video. You can find actually a lot on YouTube nowadays of analysts testifying in cases, and they're going to be looking at those and just sort of asking the question, okay, what did you like and not about the way the analyst handled those questions or that line of questioning. So we are excited about that program. That's everything on agenda item 9. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. One thing is we did get a request from Texas DPS to fund materials trades training. We don't have the budget to do that right now, but our hope is that we may later in the fiscal year or in the following year. And then we would help with the funding for that.
Item number 10. Rule amendments.
Let me just get to this spot in the agenda. So, we have the first rule, proposed rule, is in response to a piece of legislation passed this session, HB 3506. For those of you who are in the DNA world, you'll recall that it's probably been a couple of years now, but there was an issue in San Francisco where the laboratory there was keeping a local database, ostensibly for quality assurance purposes, where they would keep profiles and come to find out those profiles were retained for an extended period of time, so over years. And what came to light after a series of issues in the criminal justice system is that in one particular case, a woman had been sexually assaulted and went and got a sexual assault kit examination or a SANE examination taken, the results of which were sexual assault kit. Her profile goes into that local database. And then some time passes and there's a property crime, criminal offense committed, and they connect the profile from that offense back to the profile from the sexual assault kit. And there was a lot of outrage around that because the idea being that it would have a chilling effect on victims' willingness to step forward and report sexual assault if they thought that maybe later that very profile that was obtained could adversely impact them. And there were questions really around consent. You know, when people go in to have a sexual assault nurse examination performed, do they understand that that might happen someday? And I think the concern was that absolutely not. That's not what survivors of sexual assault believe when they go to the hospital. So the Texas legislature, certain members read about this issue and they wanted to head that off of the pass for Texas and prevent retention of profiles locally for an extended period like happened in San Francisco. The law that was passed has a 90-day limitation for retention of profiles. Having talked with the labs around Texas, there's quite a bit of variability in people's opinions about whether this is reasonable or not. I think there are some labs that would like to see it extended to, say, 180 days or something. We don't have the authority to do that because in the law is the 90-day time frame. So the proposed rule, they gave us the rulemaking authority, or they asked us to promulgate the rules for this. And so we are following the law, and the proposed rule that you have in your materials is set up to be responsive to the bill that was passed. And with some feedback from the TAP plan, we made some clarifications to certain somewhat incomplete definitions that were in the original statute. So we could ask for public comment. We may or may not have any on this particular item. But the proposed rule is in response to HB 3506.
Yeah, so that's law. That's nothing we can change that it extended. So this is, all right. So is there any public comment? All right. So is there a motion to propose the amendments to Rule 651.211 subject to the non-substantive revisions from the Office of the Governor, non-substantive changes from the Texas Register?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
So the next item that actually arose just yesterday in the licensing advisory committee. If you recall, last quarter, you voted on a rule to change birth dates from every 2, or expiration for licensure from every 2 years to coinciding with the applicant's birth date. That set of rules also has in it what we believe is an inconsistency that needs clarification. That particular part of the rules talks about who is eligible to sit for the forensic analyst exam. Before the voluntary program, there were only 2 types of individuals who could sit for the general exam. One is people who are employed by an accredited lab, and the second is students who could demonstrate that they had certain proctoring capabilities at their higher ed campus. So we have had both of those. Obviously, we've had a lot of examinees from accredited labs, and we've also had students take the test. But in order to make the voluntary program work, we need to just be clear in that rule that it also includes anyone who's applying eligible for the voluntary licenses, from Friction Ridge to Digital to Anthro to Question Documents to now Crime Scene. So in order to effectuate fixing this internal inconsistency, we need to do 2 things. One is to withdraw the vote that you took the last quarter, and the second is essentially to replace it with this edit that will make sure that there aren't any internal inconsistencies in our rules. And this is something that we didn't catch last meeting that became apparent during discussions at this meeting. Dr. Bernard has the language that we would offer to do this. So it'll be done in 2 steps. One is first the motion to withdraw, and second is the motion to propose the new version.
Any discussion on that? So the first is motion to move to withdraw the vote on July 21st, 2023, to propose amendments to Texas Administrative Code sections 651.207 to 651.208.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Second motion is to propose amendments to Texas Administrative Codes, sections 651.207 and 651.208 regarding changing licenses, expiration dates to the licenses at birth date as proposed by the staff at this meeting, subject to suggested non-substantive revision from the Office of the Governor, Texas Register and staff.
So moved.
Second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
The next agenda item is to welcome Mark Stolero, who I know many of you know, and he has a presentation. Mark, if you'd like to come up, we will start showing this. Give me 1 second. I just want to get it. Yeah, okay. So we just need to do show share screen, right? Yeah. And Mark Stolero, I know a lot of you know him, but he joins us from NIST, an agency he retired from and is now back working on implementation activities for OSAC, for the OSAC registry. And Mark is going to talk to us about where we stand. And I know that Dr. Kerrigan may have some thoughts as well. But Mark has been with the OSAC since the very beginning, where he headed up the office of the OSAC programs office. So we are thrilled to have you here, Mark. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and I'm truly honored by the invitation to have an opportunity to meet with you in person and to provide you with an update on OSAC standards implementation. We are actually celebrating at the American Academy meeting in February in Denver, the 10-year anniversary of OSAC. And it seems in some ways like a century, in other ways it seems like overnight. And the path that we have taken through OSAC is in no small measure without acknowledging the contributions that have been made by people who were sitting at your table. And I look around the table and there are a few faces that I don't recognize, but not many. So I just wanted to say that the relationship that we have enjoyed with not only your commissioners, but also with this commission has been nothing less than spectacular. One of the slides for this brief introduction, I'm going to come to this slide again, but I'd like to steal the information on that slide to share with you. It's a heat map that is a description of where the individuals who participate as members of OSAC or affiliates of OSAC come from, and also in the National Association of Forensic Science Board that's meeting here in November, which I will sign up for and will bother you again to come to see you in November. It is so readily apparent that the activities and the accomplishments and the partnership that this commission has with law enforcement and stakeholder community, forensic science community in Texas is exemplary. And I'm sure it's not the first time that people have said to you, you are the model for the rest of this country, but I wanted to take the opportunity to actually say it on the record. So even though I'm not under oath, these are my true feelings, and I want to compliment you on having all of the stakeholders, and in particular, the partnership with forensic science community in Texas. It's not adversarial. And it is so remarkable how much progress can be made when you're partnering with the very people that you have oversight for. And if there's anything that's a take-home message that I'd like to share with other organizations when I'm having meetings, is to continuously use the example of the Texas Commission, and that it can be done, and that it is being done. So except from having so many appearances from Dr. Stout at meetings that I go to, I wanted you to know that your name is also being broadcast nationwide for the accomplishments that you have. So hopefully I've avoided any criticism of my presentation now, but I welcome your questions as we go along. My disclaimers, the first, of course, is that the opinions are entirely mine and not that of either NIST or the Department of Commerce or the US government. The important disclaimer, however, is this one. NIST is a non-regulatory agency, and it seems crazy that they have such a huge impact on science and technology in this country. They have 5 Nobel laureates in physics, and I can go on, but NIST as an organization is a convener. They're a collaborator. They're a facilitator. It's important in the forensic science community, and indeed in the criminal justice system, that the role that they have as a non-regulatory agency means that if anything is going to be adopted, implemented, operational improvements among forensic scientists, it has to be a value proposition. It has to have benefits in order for implementation to occur, because it's non-regulatory. No one is mandated to do that. And despite the mandating authority, which Texas Commission enjoys, standards implementation is not something you're mandating. And I was interested to hear a year ago, 2 years ago now, when Lynn said to me, we're asking agencies to voluntarily adopt standards on the OSAC registry. Well, on the one hand, I was thrilled. On the other hand, I thought, gee, that's interesting. What if you decided to mandate those standards? But that's not a good idea. And I think the idea that we have a proposition, a value proposition for demonstrating benefits and value for standards has so much more impact in the long run, because you're dealing with a diversity of stakeholders, some of whom would love to have things mandated, and others, in particular the forensic science service providers themselves, need to participate in the development of the standards and need to buy into it. And if they believe it, they'll implement it. But having that implementation be voluntary instead of mandatory is the difference between compliance and commitment. You don't accept and implement something for which you don't have respect. If it's voluntary and you do accept it, that level of commitment, if you participated in the development of the standards and now the implementation of standards, is so much more meaningful and useful and impactful. All right, so that's my soapbox, and I wanted to give the message, but I think you're doing it absolutely the right way. You're making these things available, educating, encouraging, and ultimately, it's the licensees who are going to have to use these standards. And I think it's a great way to go. Okay. OSAC has a mission, which is to create a sustainable organization, organizational infrastructure dedicated to identifying and fostering the development of technically sound, consensus-based documentary standards and guidelines. That's the first half. And today I'm here to talk to you about encouraging widespread implementation. All of you on this board know the process for developing standards, and I'm not going to spend any time, despite the fact that it's 90% of what OSAC does. I'm not actually going to be discussing the structure of the processes for developing standards today. I wanted to focus on the implementation piece. This is the structure of the organization at a glance. There are 7 scientific area committees that you see in colors around the wheel. This is our lollipop chart. This is a refinement of the original lollipop chart. And the first one really did look like a lollipop chart, I have to say. But this is an example of the structure, and it has 7 different scientific discipline groups in colors around the wheel. And each of the 22 subcommittees is depicted in icons around that circle. I'm not going to spend any more time on this. You're familiar with the structure of OSAC. We have 475 members, 357 active affiliates as of a month ago. So we have almost 900 people from 50 states who participate in this process. And the one thing that I wanted to point out to you, I don't know, this is if you look at the employer classification, we have federal, state, local employees who are practitioners. 58% are practitioners, and it's not by accident that we have that many, that large of a proportion of practitioners who are involved in the development of standards, because buy-in is everything. And if they had no one representing them in this organization, then they also wouldn't buy into it. So by design, half of them are people who are operational practitioners or laboratory managers, quality managers, directors. We have academic, private, which represent the other 42%. That's really, those are the primary materials that I wanted to mention on this slide. The other thing is that at the center, you see on the left-hand side, is the Forensic Science Standards Board. And I feel as though everyone on this commission is an honorary member of the Forensic Science Standards Board for having so much of the representation of that board sitting at this table. So I other than saying good job, well done, I wanted to say that they also used resources that's not depicted in that photograph of 4 task groups to give them expertise in areas of human factors, statisticians, legal, and quality infrastructure that builds on the strength of creating standards with input from people who are critical by nature, suspicious by nature of the standards that are being created, who now have been moved to the subcommittee level to have input during the development process and not just waiting for comments at the end. And it's a substantial improvement, and I did want to take the time, your time today, to tell you about that and the value that contributes to the quality of the standards as they're being developed. There's the heat map, and there's Texas. You're high on the map for participation. We didn't realize that Texas would be the new seat of forensic science advancement in the United States, but I'm delighted. Having been on the Blue Ribbon Committee that reviewed the Houston Forensic Science, the Houston Police Department Crime Laboratory over a 2-year period, you have no idea how impressed I am with the incredible spectrum that the state of Texas has gone through in your attention to quality in forensic science.
Yeah, but I'm worried about California and Virginia. They're out pacing us. We gotta fix that. That's not right. I mean,
It's
especially California, no. We gotta get ahead of
I
it.
know better than to engage in a discussion of competition between Texas and California, so I leave that to you, Lynn.
We gotta fix this.
All right, never win. All right. So you know what OSAC does. I already stated that one of the things that it doesn't do is that we don't have authority to enforce standards. And standards by nature have to be a value proposition. We haven't reached, well, I'll let that go for another point, but I also wanted to say we don't publish standards. There's a law which is abbreviated NTTAA that federal government agencies are prohibited by law from creating and introducing standards on their own if there is a private standard developing organization in the United States that can do that. And forensic science is one of those. We have standards now, I think, from 8 scientific developing organizations who will ultimately adopt, publish, and copyright and own those standards. But in the US, unlike other countries, it's important that they use existing standard developing organizations. And so we have interactions and collaborations with all of these groups. And it isn't necessary for NIST or OSAC to own the standard. And there are some advantages and there's some disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage is time. It just takes so long to get through the process. But the advantage is there's no shortage of public comment. There's no shortage of consensus. And the consensus is the important part, because once you say, okay, everybody, nobody thinks this is a perfect standard, but damn it, this is what we would agree to do, then you can all move together in concert to get a standard implemented widely. And if you have objections, you can deal with them on the merits of the objection, not because you don't have someone who is refusing to even begin the adoption of the standard. And I only say that to you today because if you can't get people started, then you will never be able to get those standards implemented. And ultimately, there are 900 people working to develop standards. If they just sit on a shelf and don't get implemented, then all of the money that's been invested is useless. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, so I'm going to move on. Anyway, these are things that we feel reasonably passionate about, and I thought that I would share that passion with you today. All right. We have 167 stands on the OSAC registry. They're added every month. Last month, there were 10. October, there were 9. So it's moving along at an increasing pace. I'll show you that in a second. But there are also another 400 standards below it that are in various stages of development. So it's a lot coming down the track. And when people say, well, you know, we don't have enough resources to start the process and we've got a big backlog, and I have to choose between quality and productivity as the director, it's easy for me. I've got to just let people get the backlogs diminished. Well, the funny part, as all of you know, is that when you improve quality, you also improve productivity. So that's a senseless discussion. But we want people to know that we have a lot of work in the pipeline. And when you consider the rate at which standards are now being added, there's 2016 on the left, all the way up to 2023. And those are the number of standards after each fiscal year that have appeared on the OSAC registry. I don't even want to know what it's going to look like 5 years from now. And we have a presentation at the Academy celebrating our 10-year anniversary. And it's like, well, what's the next 10 years going to be? Because we should be forward looking. 10 years from now, I can't begin to tell you, if you haven't started this process yet, that train is going to be accelerating in speed, and running after to try to catch up is going to be much more difficult, especially when defense attorneys are asking your employees, the employees of crime labs, well, what about standard so-and-so? Have you implemented that standard? Oh, you haven't. So I think we've been out ahead of it, and we're getting participation and we're getting implementation on the part of a lot of laboratories. But it's important to get that process going, because we're spending a lot of time now in educating academia, the legal community, judges, defense attorneys, prosecutors, and as they begin to learn and begin to drill down in cross-examination on the implementation of these standards, it's going to be harder and harder for laboratories that have not begun their implementation to be able to adequately address those questions. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that of all the stakeholders, on the left-hand side, the fourth one down is forensic science service providers. That is not limited to traditional laboratories. The 410 government crime laboratories in the United States, we realize that of the 20,000 people who are employed by those laboratories, there are 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the number of forensic science service providers in non-traditional disciplines like crime scene investigation, digital, fingerprints, who are out collecting, writing reports and giving testimony, despite the fact that they're not in accredited laboratories. And I know that you have done a lot. Lynn has given me some of the examples of areas where they're moving in to assist crime scene investigators and digital and so forth. But that's a big focus of OSAC. And we recognize that, and we're partnering with organizations to give money to develop training materials. I'm gonna skip that. That's a declaration form. The declaration form for agencies to complete in each of the 22 disciplines with checkboxes indicating full implementation, partial implementation, not applicable, we haven't gotten to it yet. That form is about 6 pages long online, and the checkboxes can be checked. And when they submit a declaration form to us, they get a certificate. I tell everybody, it's a certificate and a check for $1 million. We haven't actually delivered any of the checks yet, but I would like to give them some incentive in addition to having a lovely certificate. The certificates, however, surprisingly, we have 147 implementation declarations that have been submitted from 31 states. Who knew 10 years ago that I would ever be standing in front of this commission saying, you know, we have a third of all the government laboratories in the United States who have already participated in this process. It's not the tipping point. It's not like accreditation where 88% of those 410 laboratories voluntarily become accredited. Well, except Texas, it's not voluntary, but in the other 48 states, New York is the same way. It's largely voluntary. So we're not yet at the tipping point, but we're hoping that at some point, people won't need to be encouraged to begin to implement standards on the OSAC registry. It will simply be the same motivation to do it as voluntary accreditation is. So I wanted to give you the distribution. There are 80 state labs, in 17 states. There are 80 state laboratories, 46 local, county, city laboratories, 5 federal laboratories, private, university, international. So it's growing. We also have an implementers cohort task group. And there are people here who are members of the task group, and we're delighted because what it means now is that you don't have to contact NIST if you want to talk to someone who can give you information about how the hell you implement, how do you begin, what are the process, what are the tools, how do I track this stuff? Gap analysis, I have no idea what gap analysis is. Who's going to teach me gap analysis? Well, all of the questions that go with the apprehensions and the anxieties that laboratories experience, some of them are misconceptions, and I'm not going to talk to you about those today, but some of them are real problems. We have a pool of people across the United States, close to where you work regionally. By the way, congratulations, Texas. There are 26 forensic science service providers in the state of Texas who have submitted declarations, more than double any other state. So whatever you are feeding and are performing in an attempt to assist and encourage, you have some great organizations doing forensic science in this state, and I compliment all of you. But I wanted to say that we have a mentor system for technical leads that's beginning to teach how to conduct gap analysis in their section, in their discipline, and also how to help them define the difference between full and partial implementation. How partial can it be before I can claim that I've implemented some of it? And what happens if it's only partial? How do I justify in court that I'm only partially implementing? And will I be embarrassed if I say it's only partial implementation? The answer is no. That's another lecture, and I won't come back. You can invite me back when I can explain the secrets to giving testimony and claiming celebration for the partial implementation that you've done. So we don't see that as a liability. We see that as a beginning. We also have cooperative agreements. There's this one for the American Academy of Forensic Sciences that helps to produce fact sheets for each of the standards. 120 of the standards on the OSAC registry have fact sheets. They're written in very, very layman's terms, defining a one-pager that defines the benefit of implementing the standard in terms that describe the details of what's in this standard and why it's of benefit. We also have checklists for gap analysis. And the checklist, which is the lower right, actually contains the elements of each of the standards, and the technical lead doing the gap analysis or the quality manager in the laboratory can use a checklist that they don't have to create on their own. They just follow the checklist and check off the boxes and move on to the next standard. So it's a tracking tool. There are other resources that we make available online and through personal virtual meetings or presentations. There's a detailed how-to guidelines, step-by-step instruction. There are standards trackers. So even if you missed last month's standards bulletin that has, I think, 12,000 people who subscribe to it now, you can just go online and look at the standards tracker and see what the status is. Is this still open for public comment, and can I write something in it, and how do I do that? These are available online at the website that you see at the bottom. The OSAC Registry Implementation Declarations form, we're going to be putting that in another format, another platform that's going to make it easier. So if you're in a section, you only have to dial up your section. You don't have to look at 6 pages of 167 standards. You can just do the 12 that are in your group, or the 5, or in anthropology, there's 1. So you can ignore the other 166 standards if you're an anthropologist. We're going to try to make that simpler. By the way, congratulations on the dashboard. Lynn said to me, "Oh, I think you're gonna like this. It's gone public now." And she gave me the link and I opened it up, my jaw dropped. And by the way, congratulations, Peter, for being one of the first 3. Anyway, it's really cool. It's really cool because stakeholders can see it. And don't you think the forensic science laboratories know that it's publicly available? So everybody wins. I'm really delighted. There are other work products that are available through OSAC and online. Again, these are just all the other bells and whistles that come along with developing standards. Every time you develop standards, someone says, "I wish we had more data on that." You know, the technical merit of the standard is limited by the fact that we just don't have any more research data. Well, we list hundreds of research needs so that funding bodies will know what is needed for developing good standards. We have reference documents, we have a lexicon, we have process maps, on and on and on. And I won't bore you with what's on next slide, but I want you to know the toolbox is big and it's too big for one person to carry anymore. So that's a good thing. And we want to make these resources available for people who are saying, if only I had someone who could help me out, where do I go? Now we have a place to go. This is the how you can get involved. And when I give presentations like the one at AFCLAN, I invite people to look at ways that they can get involved in developing standards or participating in commenting, become an affiliate, become a member, and more importantly, make sure they have access to the publicly published documents on standards that come out monthly and quarterly from OSAC. And I come to the end, and you're thinking to yourself, my God, you know, there's nothing drier than forensic science standards. And my only apology is that I don't know how to make it sound really sexy and exciting, but I want to compliment all of you for keeping your enthusiasm to a minimum during my presentation so that I can get through it. You guys are great. And I love teasing this group because I've known many of you for a very long time. And for those that I haven't, I apologize if it sounded really stupid. But on the other hand, I have to be careful not to fall asleep during my own presentation because it's a hard floor. So on that note, I think I wanted to finish before noon so that if you have any questions, you have 11 seconds to ask me any questions.
I actually do have one, Mark. First, really thank you very much for being here today. And I really miss your presentation skills, contrary to what you're claiming right now. So it's been a pleasure. My question here is really if you could provide just a couple of examples of partial implementation, because it's something like gray area, just to give us an idea.
Sure. Really, the tiny version in answer, no details in this question is you may not have an instrument. You may be doing something for which there's a standard that describes how to do some procedure. Toxicology has them. Even gunshot residue has them. If you have an SEM in your laboratory, well, gunshot residue, you can do it on an SEM. If you don't have an SEM, it doesn't mean you can't apply that standard, either in collecting the evidence to give it to somebody who has an SEM, or because you have some chemical materials that you can use for gunshot residue. The second is that partial implementation happens because your laboratory makes the decision. Your toxicology group got together and said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to make an approximation for how many hours it's been since that sample was collected of what we think the level of toxicology, the level of alcohol was in the blood. Let's just not do that until there's more research. If you decide that you're not going to honor that particular standard and you don't want to employ it and require compliance, you have the option in your own laboratory to make that decision. Well, that's partial. The other way is to say, my God, it's only been out for a month and we're about 2/3 of the way through the standard. So it's partially implemented and we'll get to the rest of it in another 6 months or next year, but it's not complete yet. That's the other way. It's just that quality is dynamic and these standards and your journey through standards will never end. There's a start, but there's never an end. And so because it's dynamic, you are going to have partials along the way, or you may have full implementation and then they change the rule and you say, well, crap, we're not going to do that. And it becomes partial again. So this is changing all the time. And I think it's important. That was a great question because people ask the question to us, well, my God, what happens if it's only partial? I'm going to get killed in court. And the answer is no, you won't. There isn't a defense attorney worth his salt that would ever open up to me as an expert witness the opportunity to turn to the jury and talk to them about my quality system for the next half hour by asking me a question about partial implementation. I'll take them through the journey. See, we are so delighted to be doing a nationally recognized standard in our laboratory. And even though it's only partially adopted today, we continue to move along through continuous improvement, and we're so delighted to have this standard. If the defense attorney wants to ask me that question, bring it on. And we have to educate people with how to respond to questions that today give them anxiety. What if I get asked this question? There are no questions dealing with standards implementation that can't be answered in a way which is very affirmative and very encouraging and still meets Rule 702, in which it's not an exaggeration. You're just telling the truth. You're telling it like it is and where you are at any particular moment. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to show you, Dr. Bussini, how you would see an example in Texas. So we have the dashboard and you would go here and you can type in full or partial, and then it shows you, right, which ones are examples of partial. And then you can go in and actually view the laboratory's rationale. Let me see if I can switch this. So I'm just going to pick this particular one. And then you can see, so this is just one example. Not some aspects of it are not currently implemented. Lab expects completion around the time frame, and then the reason why: insufficient resources, personnel. So they're waiting to bring more people online to help with some aspect of the standard implementation. And then me can ask the lab more details, but what we try to do is present this information in such a way that the public can understand. You know, a lot of labs do full implementation, but we give the option for partial too. Where appropriate. Does that help?
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you.
Kerrigan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Nothing beyond what Mark mentioned. I'm just thrilled that Mark is here to talk about all of the efforts and his passion for this is really being there at the very beginning and providing the leadership to make this the success that it is today. I talked about the cooperative agreement at the last meeting in more detail, the fact sheets and the checklist. I think we're all really excited about the implementer cohort task group, which is going to be providing more of those resources that you've heard Mark talking about, including mentorship and a space for forensic science service providers to engage in dialogue to assist each other with implementation challenges across jurisdictions, because the challenges for a small city lab are very different from a Brady Mills challenge running a system-wide lab. So we're excited about all of that. And one of the things with regard to the portal that I'm really excited about is the fact that we're capturing, and you just saw Lynn show us, the reason why labs are unable to adhere to some of the provisions within some of those standards, whether it's funding, training, personnel, or something else. And there's another initiative that some of you are aware of that ties into that. The reason why that's being captured is because we want to know. Because if we find that if there is a standard that everybody thinks is important and it's made it onto the OSAC registry, but there are labs in our state that are failing to comply with a provision within an important standard because they don't have the equipment, for example, the commission wants to know about that. But there's another effort that's happening at the national level, and that is, we call it the heat map exercise, but it's an initiative from the federal government. It's from the FLNTWIG, the Forensic Lab Needs Technical Working Group. And so the task group that's addressing standards implementation more broadly is developing a heat map of all of the standards across the subcommittees. So you saw Mark show the lollipop structure of the OSAC. So what we have done with this effort is, our vision is that you will see that OSAC lollipop structure, but the subcommittees, the disciplines that are experiencing the greatest pain implementing standards, whether it's friction ridge or BPA or DNA or toxicology or seized drugs, are going to be red. Those are our danger zones, and the ones that are experiencing a lower magnitude of threat with regard to implementing standards are going to be green. So it's a heat map of the OSAC lollipop structure showing where those resources need to be spent at the national level. So this project took us about a year to put together, but we've collected all of that data, and the white paper should be coming out from the NIJ by the end of this calendar year. So we're really excited about that because although we're capturing some of that information in the portal in Texas, this is across the country, and it's going to help inform where those resources need to be. So I think that's going to be important for state legislatures, for forensic science service providers that are within different jurisdictions, maybe city or county, that can advocate for some of those resources. So it's not designed to be anything punitive. In fact, just the opposite. It's meant to be designed as a tool that will help FSSPs further deploy standards within their organization. So we're excited about all of these things that are going on.
That can be used for leverage in budget hearing. All right, thank you very much. Item number 12, Dr. Stout.
Update from TechLab. We didn't meet this time. We meet next time with the January meeting. I think really our only major update is we were really pleased to have to go find a new secretary. Since our secretary now here, that's all we got.
All right, for post agenda items, we're talking about the firearms paper, and then the discussion of the contamination with Sharpies and potentially other things. Next meeting, January 26th. And last thing, is there any public comment? All right, hearing none. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Well, just the April meeting is gonna be April 26th.
April 26th. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn? Second,
Second.
all those in favor say aye. Motion, any objection? Motion carries.